The sky over Terra Prime had been clear that morning. It was a peaceful day, one of those rare moments when everything seemed to be in perfect balance. The people of the colony went about their business, unaware of the storm that was about to break. The future of humanity was about to be changed forever. Terra Prime was a young world, a colony of Earth, but it was one of the most important. It was rich in resources, and its people had quickly adapted to their new life. The planet was a symbol of humanity's resilience, a reminder of how far they had come. However, the peace they enjoyed was about to be shattered. At exactly 12:00 p.m., the sky darkened. An enormous ship appeared out of nowhere, its massive silhouette casting a shadow over the entire planet. It was not like any ship humanity had ever seen. It seemed to shimmer in the air, as though it were made of liquid metal. No one had seen anything like it, and no one had any idea where it came from. The ship hovered over the city of New Avalon, humanity's largest settlement on Terra Prime. Inside the city, the first signs of panic began to spread. News of the ship's arrival reached the people quickly, and soon the streets were crowded with frightened citizens. They rushed to their homes, and the military scrambled to prepare for an unknown threat. The government issued a warning, but no one had any idea what was happening. Then, a voice filled the air, loud and clear. It was not broadcast through any local system, but instead seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am Tirith, Empress of the Valerian Empire. You, humans, are hereby conquered. Your world is now mine." The voice carried an unnatural authority, a tone that made everyone freeze in place. It wasn't the kind of announcement anyone could ignore. And then, the ship above them began to lower. It moved with the grace of a bird, but the fear it instilled in the people was anything but graceful. Aiden Cross stood on the rooftop of the Terran Defense Headquarters, looking up at the massive ship as it descended. He had been part of the military during the early days of humanity's exploration of the stars, and he had seen his fair share of alien encounters. None of them had been like this. This was different. This was a declaration of war. He had expected something like this to happen eventually. There had been rumors for years of alien civilizations, but humanity's rapid expansion into space had always been driven by a sense of pride. They believed in their own strength, and they believed they were untouchable. But this was no ordinary attack. Aiden was tall, with short, dark hair and a stern expression. He had seen enough violence in his life to know that survival depended on quick thinking. As the ship continued its descent, he thought about the best course of action. His first instinct was to call for the military's full response, but there was something in the air that made him hesitate. This was no random alien force. This was an empress, someone with an agenda. The ship finally landed in the middle of New Avalon, a perfect circle of dust and smoke forming around its base. The people gathered at the windows of their homes and shops, watching the ship with a mix of fear and curiosity. And then, Tirith herself emerged from the ship. She was tall, even by alien standards, with skin that seemed to shimmer in the light like polished marble. Her eyes were a piercing blue, with no visible whites, just a solid, glowing color that seemed to pierce the soul. She wore a silver armor that covered her from head to toe, but her presence was far more striking than her appearance. It was the way she moved, the confidence in her every step, that made everyone freeze. It was the kind of presence that demanded attention, and for a moment, no one moved or spoke. She stood on the ground, looking around at the gathered crowd. Her voice rang out again, cold and commanding. "Kneel before me, humans. Bow before your new ruler." The words echoed in the air, and the crowd hesitated. Aiden watched from the rooftop, analyzing the situation. He could feel the fear spreading through the people below, and he understood it. Tirith was powerful, there was no doubt about it. The sheer force of her presence was enough to make the bravest warrior reconsider his position. But Aiden had fought battles before. He had faced impossible odds and had never once backed down. Kneeling before an enemy was not in his nature, and he would never allow humanity to bow before anyone. The Empress's gaze moved across the crowd, landing on Aiden. She seemed to notice him, standing motionless on the rooftop, her blue eyes narrowing. Aiden didn't flinch. He was not about to let fear dictate his actions. "I see one who refuses to kneel," Tirith said, her voice colder than before. "You human, do you not understand the power I wield? You will bow before me or face extinction." The words sent a chill down Aiden's spine, but he did not move. There was something in her tone that was almost dismissive, as if she expected him to obey immediately. But Aiden Cross was not the type to bow down to anyone, and especially not to someone who thought she could simply take whatever she wanted. He stepped forward, his voice clear and firm as he shouted, "We will not kneel. Not to you, not to any alien empire. Humanity will never submit." The crowd gasped at his defiance, and for a brief moment, the Empress seemed taken aback. She didn't expect this. Tirith's eyes narrowed even further, as though sizing him up. "We shall see, human," she said softly, her voice now a whisper that carried across the square. "We shall see." The crowd stood frozen as Tirith, the alien Empress, surveyed them. Her presence was overwhelming, and every person felt the weight of her gaze. Aiden stood firm, not budging an inch. His defiance had caught her attention, but Tirith was not a being to be challenged lightly. She was used to power, used to having everything fall in line with a single command. The Empress' eyes gleamed as she took a slow step forward. The air around her seemed to crackle with energy. Without a word, she raised her hand, and suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The buildings around them shook, windows rattling as if a great weight were pressing down upon them. A strange hum filled the air, growing louder and more intense with each passing second. It was not the sound of technology, but something far more primal, something that carried a sense of undeniable authority. Aiden stood still, refusing to flinch. He had seen strange things in his time, but this was different. Tirith was not using a weapon or a ship's firepower. She was wielding raw, almost godlike power, something that was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. She smiled coldly as the trembling intensified. "You refuse to kneel, human. Let's see how long your defiance lasts under the weight of true power." As she spoke, her eyes began to glow even brighter, and a pulse of energy radiated outward from her body. It was invisible to the eye, but everyone could feel it. It was like a wave of pressure, pushing against their bodies, making it harder to breathe, harder to stand. The people in the crowd began to stagger, their knees buckling as the invisible force weighed down on them. Many collapsed, unable to withstand the pressure. Some tried to stay on their feet but failed, falling to their knees before the Empress. Murmurs of fear spread quickly through the crowd, and soon, only a handful of people remained standing. Aiden's muscles tightened as the force hit him, but he did not bow. His resolve was unshakable. He felt the pressure, felt the air grow heavier in his lungs, but he fought to stay upright. His thoughts raced, trying to find a way to resist, to push back against the overwhelming force. The Empress watched him closely, intrigued by his stubbornness. Most of the people had fallen to their knees, but Aiden remained standing, eyes locked with hers. It was a simple act, a small gesture in the face of overwhelming power, yet it was enough to make Tirith pause. "You are stronger than most," she said, her voice softer now, though still carrying that same chilling edge. "But strength is not enough when faced with true dominance." With a flick of her fingers, the pressure grew even stronger, and Aiden felt his legs begin to tremble. He pushed against the invisible force with all his might, but it was like trying to fight against an ocean. His body was growing weaker with every passing second. He could feel his breath becoming shallow, his vision blurring at the edges. It would only be a matter of time before he would fall like the others. But Aiden had been in worse situations before. He had fought enemies who seemed invincible, survived battles where victory seemed impossible. His strength wasn't just physical, it was mental. It was his determination, his will to survive. He had learned long ago that in the darkest moments, The mind could push the body farther than it ever thought possible. He dug deep, finding the spark of his own resolve, and with a slow breath, he stood taller. The pressure didn't let up, but something in him refused to yield. He gritted his teeth, focusing all his strength on resisting the weight bearing down on him. Tirith, seeing the effort in his eyes, let out a small, almost amused laugh. "You still think you can resist?" she said, her voice now laced with a hint of curiosity. "You're a stubborn one, human. I can respect that. But your will is nothing compared to the power I wield." Her hand moved again, and a crackling energy built up around her fingers. It looked like lightning, but smoother, more controlled. With a swift motion, she released it, sending a bolt of energy toward Aiden. The blast was fast, brighter than a star, and Aiden barely had time to react. He dodged, but the energy grazed his side, sending a shockwave of pain through him. He stumbled, almost falling to his knees, but he caught himself just in time. For a moment, the pain blinded him, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through. He had been hurt worse. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Some of them had recovered from the pressure and were now gazing at Aiden with a new kind of awe. They had seen him resist Tirith's force when everyone else had fallen. Even those who had knelt before her now looked at him with hope in their eyes. Tirith's expression shifted as she observed Aiden's unyielding defiance. She had expected him to be broken by now, like the others. Instead, he was still standing, though clearly struggling. His eyes, though, were filled with fire, a fire that was not easy to extinguish. "You fight well, human," she said slowly, her tone shifting from cold authority to something more thoughtful. "But this is not a battle you can win. You are weak, and I will crush you, just as I have crushed every other species foolish enough to resist me." Aiden raised his chin, his voice steady despite the pain. "Then you'll have to crush all of humanity, because we're not backing down." Tirith studied him for a moment longer, her eyes narrowing. There was something in the way Aiden spoke that made her pause. It was not just the words. It was the belief behind them, the confidence that even in the face of overwhelming power, humanity would never bend. For the first time since her arrival, the Empress was unsure. "You speak with conviction," she said slowly, "but words alone will not save you." Aiden didn't reply. Instead, he stood tall, his gaze never leaving hers. He knew the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But the first crack in Tirith's armor had appeared, and that was all he needed. The battle had only just begun. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm that had not yet fully unleashed its fury. Tirith, the alien Empress, stood before Aiden, her eyes still glowing with the power she had used to bend the crowd to her will. She had expected him to fall like the others. But here he was, still standing, his body trembling from the immense pressure she had forced on him, yet his spirit unbroken. Aiden knew he couldn't keep resisting her power forever. The force she wielded was unimaginable, far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. But what Tirith didn't understand was that the human spirit, though fragile in the face of power, was incredibly resilient when pushed to the edge. "You're wasting your strength," Tirith said, her voice calm but cold. "You cannot defeat me. You are nothing but a weak, fragile creature compared to me." Aiden's eyes locked with hers, unwavering. He felt the strain in his body, but his mind was sharp. "You're wrong," he said, his voice clear and steady. "You think you're the first one to try and break humanity. You've never met anyone like us." Tirith raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his words. "What makes you think you're different from the others? I've destroyed entire civilizations. Your people are no exception." Aiden stood a little straighter, despite the pain in his side from where her energy bolt had struck him earlier. He knew he had only one chance to make her see, one chance to show her that humanity was far more than a collection of weak, defenseless creatures. It wasn't about strength or power. It was about something deeper, something that no amount of pressure could crush. "You really don't understand, do you?" Aiden began, his voice growing stronger. You think humans are just like the other species you've conquered. But we aren't. We've been pushed to the edge, over and over again. And every time we've fallen, we've gotten back up. We don't give up. Ever. Tyrith's eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. What are you trying to say? Aiden took a deep breath. He had to choose his words carefully. I'm saying that humanity's strength doesn't come from our power, or our technology, or our military. It comes from something much more powerful, something that has helped us survive against impossible odds. The Empress said nothing, but she was listening now. The crowd around them had fallen silent, waiting for Aiden's next words. Aiden glanced at the people nearby, their faces filled with fear, but also with something else. Hope. It was a fragile hope, but it was there. And Aiden knew that if he could just make Tirith understand what made humanity different, they might stand a chance. Our history is full of moments where we were supposed to lose, he continued, his voice now carrying across the square. You probably don't know this, but Earth wasn't always peaceful. We fought wars, we fought against ourselves, and we almost destroyed each other. But we learned, we grew, we found ways to rebuild. And in doing so, we discovered something about ourselves. Tirith tilted her head, clearly intrigued but still unconvinced. What did you discover? Aiden took another breath, thinking back to the darkest days of human history. We discovered that no matter how bad things got, no matter how hard we were pushed, we always found a way to survive. Every time we were pushed to the brink, we found strength we didn't even know we had. We are a species of survivors. We fight for each other. We fight for what's right, even when the odds are against us. And we don't stop. Not ever. Tyrith's expression shifted slightly. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that wasn't just cold calculation. She had heard many stories of powerful civilizations, but no one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever challenged her with such conviction. Aiden saw the change, however slight, and pressed on. The greatest war we ever fought was against an alien race called the Zolfar. They were powerful, advanced far beyond us in technology and weaponry. They wiped out nearly half of our population before we even knew how to fight back. But we didn't surrender. We fought. And in the end, we drove them out. We weren't the strongest, but we had something they didn't. The will to survive. The Empress stood still, absorbing his words. Aiden could tell that she was processing everything he was saying, but her mind was still struggling to understand. To her, power and strength were everything. She couldn't fathom that a species like humanity, so physically weak in comparison to her, could have anything worth fighting for. And we didn't stop with the Zolfar, Aiden continued, his voice growing stronger with every word. We rebuilt, we explored space, and we fought against more threats. We even found ways to help other species to protect them from dangers they couldn't face alone. Humanity is a species that doesn't just fight for survival. We fight for the future. We fight for others, even when we have nothing left to give. Tyrith's gaze softened, though her expression was still unreadable. Aiden had expected her to laugh at him, to mock him for his idealism. But instead, she seemed to be reflecting on his words. Her eyes moved over the people around them, people who had watched her demonstration of power, but were now watching Aiden with a different kind of respect. You speak of survival, of fighting for the future, Tirith said slowly, her voice almost thoughtful now. But what does that even mean? Why fight for a future that may never come? What makes you so certain you can win? Aiden looked her in the eye, his voice firm. Because we never give up. That's why we fight. That's what makes us different. We don't give up when the odds are against us. We don't bow, we don't kneel, and we don't stop until we've won. That's the true strength of humanity. Tirith stood silent for a long time, her gaze lingering on Aiden. She had expected to see fear, to see weakness in him. But all she saw was the unshakable will of a species that had fought and survived for centuries. And for the first time, She wasn't sure who was the real threat in this encounter. Aiden's words had struck a chord, and something in her began to shift. Maybe she had underestimated them, and maybe this would not be as easy as she had thought. The silence in the square was almost deafening. Tirith, the Empress of the Valerian Empire, stood motionless, her piercing blue eyes fixed on Aiden Cross. The humans around them held their breath, too afraid to move or speak. Aiden's words still hung in the air, echoing in the hearts of everyone who had heard them. Tirith finally broke the silence, her voice low but sharp. "You speak as if your defiance is noble, as if it will somehow save you. But words cannot shield you from power." She raised her hand again, and the energy that had rippled through the air earlier began to return. The sky above grew darker, and the air seemed to hum with an unnatural tension. The humans in the crowd instinctively stepped back, their fear resurfacing as Tirith's overwhelming power became visible once more. Aiden felt the energy in the air, the same crushing force that had threatened to bring him to his knees before. But this time, he was ready. He stood tall, his jaw clenched, refusing to let fear cloud his mind. He didn't have a weapon, he didn't have a plan, but he had something stronger. The belief that humanity's spirit could not be broken. "You think we're weak because we don't have your power," Aiden said, his voice steady. "But you're wrong. Strength isn't just about the weapons you carry or the energy you control. Real strength is about standing up when everything is against you. It's about hope." Tirith's glowing eyes narrowed. "Hope," she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "Hope is a fool's crutch. It cannot stop me. It cannot save you." Aiden took a step forward, ignoring the searing pain in his side from the earlier attack. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, their silent prayers for someone to stand against the alien Empress. He wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He was speaking for all of them. "Hope is what drives us," he said firmly. "It's what kept us alive when stronger forces tried to destroy us. It's what gives us the courage to fight, even when the odds are impossible. And it's what will stop you." Tirith tilted her head, a flicker of curiosity breaking through her cold exterior. "You truly believe you can stop me?" With nothing but words and defiance. Aiden's lips curled into a faint smile. "You're right about one thing. Words alone won't stop you, but humanity isn't just words. We've faced empires before. We've fought enemies who thought they were invincible. And every time, we found a way." Tirith's gaze shifted, scanning the crowd. The humans who had been kneeling earlier were now standing again, their fear slowly giving way to something else. Determination. Hope. The very thing she had dismissed as weakness was now spreading among the people she sought to conquer. For the first time since her arrival, Tirith felt a sliver of doubt. It was an unfamiliar feeling, one she had not experienced in centuries. She was used to victory, to absolute submission. Yet here was a species that refused to bow, led by a single man whose words carried the weight of 1,000 battles. She took a step closer to Aiden, the energy around her crackling like a storm. "You think this little rebellion of yours will make a difference?" she asked, her voice laced with both curiosity and menace. "I could destroy this entire colony with a single command. I could erase every trace of your existence. And you'd still lose," Aiden replied without hesitation. His words were calm, almost conversational, but they carried a power that even Tirith could not ignore. "Because humanity doesn't die so easily. You can destroy this colony, but there will be more of us. There will always be more of us. And every time you try to crush us, we'll rise again, stronger than before." Tirith's hand faltered, the crackling energy dimming slightly. She studied him, her expression unreadable. She could sense something in him, something she couldn't fully understand. It wasn't just defiance. It was belief, a belief so strong that it seemed to radiate from him like a beacon. "You're either very brave," she said quietly, "or very foolish." Aiden's smile widened. "Maybe both. But that's what makes us human." The crowd began to stir, their murmurs growing louder. Aiden's words were igniting something in them, a collective realization that they were not powerless. The fear that had gripped them moments ago was fading, replaced by a fierce determination. Tirith noticed the change, and for the first time, she felt the weight of their stares. These humans, who had seemed so small and insignificant, were now standing together, united in a way she had not anticipated. Her gaze returned to Aiden, and she felt a strange unease. She had come here expecting submission, expecting fear. Instead, she was met with resistance and something she could not fully grasp, a strength that had nothing to do with power or weapons. "I will not kneel," Aiden said firmly, his voice carrying across the square. "And neither will they." Tirith remained silent, her glowing eyes fixed on him. For the first time, she hesitated. The power she wielded was immense, but against a force like this, a force she couldn't see or understand, she wasn't sure if it would be enough. The humans stood tall, their courage growing with every passing second. Aiden had lit a spark, and now it was spreading like wildfire. The Empress of the Valerian Empire realized something she had never considered before. Perhaps in all her conquests, she had underestimated the one thing no power could extinguish: the unyielding spirit of humanity. The air around Tirith crackled with energy, her glowing eyes fixed on Aiden. The humans in the square stood behind him, their fear slowly dissolving as his words had filled them with hope. Aiden could feel the weight of their expectations, but he also felt their strength. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who refused to kneel. Tirith tilted her head, studying him. For a being who had commanded galaxies and subjugated countless civilizations, this resistance was both infuriating and fascinating. "You think unity alone will protect you?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Your defiance is admirable, but it is also futile. I have destroyed empires stronger than yours." Aiden stood firm, his face calm despite the storm of energy swirling around her. "Empires might fall to your power," he said, his voice steady, "but you're not fighting an empire here. You're fighting an idea, and ideas don't die so easily." The Empress's expression tightened, but she didn't respond immediately. She took a step closer, the ground beneath her feet glowing faintly with each movement. The humans instinctively backed away, but Aiden didn't budge. He held his ground, his eyes locked with hers. Tirith finally spoke, her tone carrying a mix of curiosity and challenge. "If you are so certain of your strength, human, then prove it. You claim to fight for your people, for your survival. Show me how you intend to win against a power you cannot comprehend." Aiden took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had no weapons, no technology that could rival hers. But what he did have was the unbreakable will of his people. He turned to the crowd, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "We don't need to fight her power with power," he began. "We faced impossible odds before. Every time we've been pushed to the brink, we've found a way. Not because we had the strongest weapons, but because we worked together. Because we refused to give up." The crowd murmured in agreement, their confidence growing with each word. Aiden gestured to the people around him, his voice rising. "She can destroy buildings, cities, even entire planets, but she can't destroy what we stand for. Not unless we let her. So I ask you, will we kneel, or will we stand together?" The response was immediate. A chorus of voices shouted back, "We stand." The energy of the crowd surged, their fear replaced by determination. Tirith watched them with a flicker of something that might have been doubt. Aiden turned back to her, his gaze unwavering. "You wanted to see our strength. You're looking at it. Our strength isn't in our weapons or technology. It's in our people, and it's in our ability to outthink, outblast, and outfight anyone who tries to take away what makes us human." Tirith's eyes narrowed, her glowing aura intensifying. "Bold words," she said, "but words alone cannot stop me." Aiden nodded, acknowledging the truth in her statement. He needed more than speeches to turn the tide. His mind raced as he thought about what he had learned about Tirith during their confrontation. She was powerful, yes, but she was also proud. She had underestimated humanity from the start, and that arrogance was something he could use. "You're right," Aiden said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Words alone won't stop you, but actions will." The Empress raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his confidence. "What actions? What can you possibly do that would matter against me?" Aiden stepped closer, his voice lowering but carrying a sharp edge. "You've fought species that surrendered the moment you displayed your power. You've conquered civilizations that knelt before you without a fight. But humanity isn't like that. We adapt, we learn, and we resist." As he spoke, Aiden subtly glanced at the edges of the square, where a few people were quietly moving. The crowd was no longer just standing in awe. They were organizing. Whispered instructions were being passed, and people began positioning themselves strategically, their movements almost imperceptible. Tirith didn't notice the subtle shifts. Her attention was fixed on Aiden. She took another step closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You think resistance will save you? I could obliterate this entire colony with a thought." "Then why haven't you?" Aiden asked, his tone challenging. "If you're so certain of your power, why are we still standing here talking?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Tirith hesitated. She had expected fear, submission, even anger. But Aiden's calm defiance was something she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just him, it was the entire crowd. Their determination was a force she couldn't easily dismiss. Aiden seized the moment, his voice rising again. "You're not used to a fight like this. You don't know how to deal with people who won't give up. And that's why we'll win." Tirith's glowing aura flared, her frustration evident. But before she could respond, a sudden, sharp sound echoed through the square. A signal. The humans who had been quietly moving sprang into action, activating devices that sent pulses of energy rippling through the air. Tirith staggered slightly, caught off guard by the disruption. The humans had used their knowledge of her energy field to create a countermeasure, one that disrupted her control, even if only for a moment. The Empress's eyes blazed as she recovered, her voice filled with fury. "You dare?" But Aiden interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're not kneeling, Tirith. Not now. Not ever." The humans stood their ground, their makeshift devices humming with defiance. Tirith's power was immense, but for the first time, she faced something she couldn't overpower, the united will of humanity. The battle wasn't over. But Aiden knew they had just taken the first step toward victory. The energy rippling through the air seemed to waver as the humans' makeshift devices disrupted Tirith's control. For the first time, the seemingly invincible Empress faltered, her glowing aura dimming slightly. The crowd noticed, their hope growing stronger as they realized their resistance wasn't futile. Aiden stood firm, his eyes locked on Tirith. His mind was racing, calculating their next move. They had bought themselves time, but that was all it was, time. Tirith's power was far from diminished, and he knew she wouldn't allow this challenge to go unanswered. Tirith steadied herself, her expression hardening. "Clever," she admitted, her voice cutting through the tense air. "I underestimated your resourcefulness, but this is merely a delay. Do you think this trick will stop me?" "It doesn't need to stop you," Aiden replied, his tone calm but resolute. "It just needs to remind you that we're not as weak as you thought." Tirith's glowing eyes narrowed, her frustration evident. She wasn't used to being challenged, and certainly not by a species she considered inferior. Her power flared once more, the ground trembling beneath her as she summoned her energy. The humans closest to her stumbled, but they quickly regained their footing, their resolve unshaken. Aiden took a step forward, drawing her attention. "You're angry because we've shown you something you didn't expect," he said. "You thought we'd fall in line like everyone else. But we're different. And deep down, you're starting to realize it." Tirith's lips curled into a cold smile. "Different? You're nothing more than a stubborn, primitive species clinging to hope. That won't save you." "Maybe not," Aiden conceded, his voice steady. "But hope is just the beginning. You see, humans don't fight alone. We fight together. And when we do, we're unstoppable." As he spoke, the humans in the crowd began to move again, their actions deliberate and coordinated. They weren't just bystanders anymore. They were a force, each person playing a role in the growing resistance. Some worked to strengthen the energy-disrupting devices, while others prepared crude but effective defenses. Tirith noticed their movements, her eyes narrowing further. "You're organizing," she said, her tone a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Do you truly believe this? Unity will save you." Aiden nodded. "Unity is what makes us strong. You've conquered species that relied on power alone, species that fell apart when faced with someone stronger. But humanity isn't like that. We adapt, we learn, and most importantly, we stand together." Tirith raised her hand, energy crackling around her fingers. "Then let's see how long your unity lasts." With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a wave of force, aimed not at Aiden, but at the devices disrupting her power. The wave struck its target, shattering several of the machines and sending others scattering across the square. The humans scrambled to recover, their resolve tested once again. Aiden braced himself against the shockwave, his mind racing. He knew they couldn't rely on the devices alone. They needed a new plan, and they needed it fast. Tirith stepped forward, her presence towering over the crowd. "You see, your efforts are futile. Your defiance is admirable, but it will not save you." But Aiden refused to back down. "You think this is over?" he called out, his voice ringing across the square. "You think breaking a few machines will stop us? You don't understand what you're up against." Tirith hesitated, her glowing eyes fixed on him. There was something in his tone, something she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just defiance, it was confidence, a quiet, unshakable belief that no amount of power could extinguish. The humans rallied around him, their determination unbroken. Some began repairing the damaged devices, while others formed a protective circle around those working. They moved with purpose, their actions guided not by fear, but by hope. Tirith's frustration grew. She was a conqueror, a ruler of galaxies, and yet here she was, struggling to subdue a single colony of humans. It didn't make sense. Their technology was primitive, their weapons laughable. And yet, they refused to yield. "You're delaying the inevitable," she said, her voice colder than ever. "I could destroy this entire planet if I wished." Aiden's gaze didn't waver. "Then why haven't you?" he asked. "If you're so certain of your power, why are we still standing here? Why are you still trying to make us kneel?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Tirith had no immediate response. She could sense the shift in the crowd, the growing confidence that radiated from them like a shield. It was unlike anything she had encountered before. "You're starting to doubt yourself," Aiden continued, his voice steady. "You've never faced resistance like this. You've never faced a species that refuses to bow, no matter the cost." Tirith's expression hardened, but Aiden could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. He pressed on, knowing this was his chance. "We're not just fighting for ourselves," he said. "We're fighting for each other, for what we believe in. And that's something you can't destroy. No matter how powerful you are, you can't break what holds us together." The humans around him cheered, their voices rising in unison. The sound echoed across the square, a declaration of defiance that even Tirith couldn't ignore. For the first time, the Empress of the Valerian Empire felt something she hadn't felt in centuries: doubt. And in that moment, she realized that this battle was far from over. The humans had made their move. Now it was her turn. The tension in the square was thick enough to cut with a knife. Tirith, the Empress of the Valerian Empire, stood at the center, her glowing eyes locked onto Aiden. She could feel the determination of the humans surrounding her. They were not backing down. And that made something stir deep within her, something she couldn't quite identify. It was not fear, not exactly, but a strange recognition that this was not going to be an easy victory. Aiden stood tall, his eyes unwavering, though his body ached from the previous encounters. He had known this moment would come, the moment when the fight would reach its peak. Humanity had come this far, and now they would either stand or fall together. "Tirith, you've seen it," Aiden said, his voice steady and strong, despite the crackling energy in the air. "You've seen what we're capable of. This isn't about weapons or power. This is about us standing together, refusing to break. We may be small, but we're stronger than you realize." Tirith stared at him, her eyes glowing even brighter. "You talk of strength as if it's something I don't understand. I have crushed countless civilizations with nothing but my will. You are nothing compared to them." Aiden's expression didn't change. "Maybe we're nothing compared to the empires you've destroyed, but we've never needed to be. We've always found a way to survive. And that's why you're here now, facing us. We won't fall." The Empress clenched her fists, and the energy around her surged with such intensity that the air shimmered. She was powerful, no doubt about it, but what unnerved her now was the calm defiance of the humans. They weren't begging for mercy. They weren't even afraid anymore. They stood as one, with a strength she hadn't anticipated. "Enough of these empty words," Tirith growled. "You think you can resist me? Fine. Let's see if your unity can save you from what's coming next." With a snap of her fingers, a violent shockwave shot through the ground, shaking the very foundations of the square. The humans were knocked off balance, some falling, but they quickly rose again, rallying around each other. They were scared, yes, but they had learned something important. Fear didn't control them. Their strength came from within. Aiden took a deep breath, sensing that now was the time. "Humans aren't afraid of dying, Tirith. We've been fighting for our survival for as long as we've existed. But what we won't do is give up, and we won't let someone like you dictate how we live." Tirith's face twisted with contempt. "You speak as if you can defeat me. I will destroy you all. There is nothing you can do to stop me." Aiden shook his head. "You still don't get it, do you? It's not about defeating you with power. It's about defeating you with something you'll never understand. Our will. Our unity. Our refusal to be controlled." The crowd around him began to chant softly, their voices growing louder with each passing moment. Aiden felt the rhythm of their words, their hearts beating together as one. They weren't just a colony anymore. They were a symbol of something much larger. Tirith's eyes flashed dangerously, and she raised her hand, preparing to strike once again. But just as she was about to unleash her full force, something unexpected happened. From the edges of the square, a small group of humans, previously hidden in plain sight, activated a series of devices they had been preparing for just this moment. These weren't just any devices. They were amplifiers, designed to disrupt Tirith's energy field more effectively than before. The ground hummed with power as the devices synchronized in perfect unison. For the first time, Tirith's expression faltered. The energy she had been controlling wavered, destabilized by the unexpected interference. She turned to face the source of the disruption, her eyes flashing with anger. "No," she shouted, her voice filled with fury. "You think these toys can stop me?" Aiden smiled, his heart racing, but his resolve unwavering. "We've had time to learn, Tirith, and we've had time to understand you. You think you're invincible. But what you don't understand is that we're not afraid to fight for what we believe in." The devices continued to hum, their effects weakening Tirith's control over the energy she commanded. The pressure in the square began to lessen, and for the first time since her arrival, the humans felt like they might have a chance. Their confidence surged, and with it, their determination. Tirith's fury reached its peak. She lashed out with a violent burst of energy, sending a shockwave across the square. But it was weaker now, its force diminished by the devices and the humans' unity. The Empress struggled, her power flickering as the amplifiers took hold. Aiden stepped forward once again, his voice steady. "It's over, Terith. You can't control us. You never could." The Empress glared at him, her expression one of disbelief. She had never imagined a species like humanity would be able to outthink her, outlast her. She had crushed so many worlds, yet here she was, struggling against a force she couldn't control. You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice full of venom. Aiden shook his head, his eyes filled with calm confidence. "No, Terith. The only thing we regret is that it took us this long to stand up to you. We won't kneel. Not now. Not ever." Terith took one final look at the humans around her, her mind racing. She had been defeated. Not by strength, not by technology, but by something far more powerful, the unwavering spirit of a united people. And with that, Terith vanished, leaving the square in stunned silence. The humans stood in the quiet aftermath, their hearts still pounding, but now filled with something else. Victory. They had faced the impossible and emerged stronger for it. They had stood together, refused to be broken, and shown the universe that humanity could not, and would not, be defeated. Aiden looked around at the people who had fought beside him. Their unity had won the day, and for the first time, he allowed himself a deep breath, knowing that they had taken the first step into a new future, one where humanity would never again kneel to anyone.